Suicide podcast. This is an international relations podcast by the students, for the students, and of the students. Today, we have Krishna Sreedharan with us, and she is a final year MA student at University of Mumbai, SIRSS. She has also interned at the Center for UN Peacekeeping, ASEAN Women's Military Course, and she has a diploma certificate in conflict transformation and peace building. Welcome, Krishna.
Hello, Shrishti. Thank you so much for introduction.
Tell us about Afghanistan. So, what is your overall take on the country?
So Afghanistan is actually currently a landlocked country. It shares borders with six countries: Pakistan to the east and south, Iran to the west, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan to the north, and a narrow 76-kilometer border with China in the far northeast called the Wakhan Corridor. So, geographically, it lies at the heart of the ancient Silk Road, making it a natural crossroad between South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. This positioning gives it an outsized influence in regional connectivity, trade routes, energy pipelines, and transnational security dynamics.
Current political situation of the country and what are the events that have shaped it?
So, Afghanistan today is governed by the Taliban, as we know, who reasserted their power in the August 2021 following the chaotic NATO US withdrawal. Since then, the regime has effectively dissolved the democratic framework of the previous Islamic Republic. The biggest controversy and arguably defining feature of the current regime is its gender apartheid system. Women have been barred from education beyond grade 6, from most forms of employment, and from most public spaces. Just this month, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against the Taliban Supreme Leader Hibatullah Akhundzada and the Chief Justice Abdul Hakim Haqqani, accusing them of crimes against humanity through gender based prosecution. Politically, there's no internal pluralism or room for dissent. Governance is based on rigid interpretation of Sharia law, enforced by the Ministry of Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of.
Main drivers of country's economy.
The Afghanistan economy is largely informal. It's heavily reliant on agriculture, remittance, and extractive industries. Opium cultivation, though banned again by the Taliban, remains an important economic undercurrent. The country itself is also resource rich with deposits of lithium, rare earth, and copper, though much of this remains untapped due to insecurity and lack of infrastructure. In this context, we see China has shown ambition in the region with increased investments in projects like the Mes Ayanak copper mines.
Say are the major economic challenges the country is facing currently?
Well, according to the UNDP, over 90% of the Afghans live below the poverty line. International aid has drastically declined post 2021, and the Taliban's inability to secure formal recognition limits access to global financial systems. There are banking restrictions, a liquidity crisis, and widespread food insecurity. Taliban are trying to pivot to regional partners like Russia, China, Iran, especially after Russia formally recognized the Taliban government in July of 2025. But systematic isolation continues to choke the economic revival. The regime has also prioritized revenue generation through customs and mining concessions, but corruption and mismanagement remain high.
Major healthcare concerns and how accessible is the healthcare system to the general public?
Well, as we can predict, the Afghanistan in healthcare infrastructure is severely strained. The system is under resourced, heavily aid dependent, and largely rural focused. Following the Taliban takeover, international funding for public health programs was suspended or rechanneled through the US agencies, which was later stopped when the US banned all forms of funding to the Taliban, including through UN sourcing, creating a staffing shortage and drug scarcity. Women's access to healthcare has been further restrained, especially in provinces where female healthcare workers are banned or discouraged.
Key healthcare concerns for the population? Are there any chronic diseases in the population?
Besides the main malnourishment and maternal mortality, both of which are alarmingly high, mental health has emerged as a silent crisis. The years of conflict, compounded by the socioeconomic collapse and gender repression, has led to spikes in depression and PTSD. There's little institutional support for mental health, and cultural stigma further isolates sufferers. The situation is particularly dire for women and young girls. Also, there are reports of increasing a rise in drug abuse among the Afghan youth.
So, what are the major internal and external security threats for Afghanistan?
Internally, Afghanistan's biggest threat is not a conventional rebellion, but an asymmetrical insurgency. The Islamic State Khorasan province, that is ISKP, over the last 3 months has stepped up its attacks targeting civilians, government buildings, the Shia Hazara communities. For example, a deadly explosion in the Nagar province was reported, which killed nearly dozens and highlighted the Taliban's ongoing struggle to contain the group. Another pressing issue is the tribal factionalism and the local warlords regaining their influence. Though the Taliban has a centralized rule, nominally governance in many provinces like Badakhshan, Patkia, and Balkh remain fragmented. These areas have witnessed intermittent clashes and power contests that undermine the internal cohesion. And there's the economic security spiral. With 85% of the population below poverty line, unemployment and scarcity is feeding the crime. Narcotics trafficking, recruitment into extremist networks, human trafficking, arms smuggling, they're all increased around the border regions that is adding to the instability. When we look at the external threats, border tensions with Pakistan have reemerged as a significant flashpoint. Islamabad accuses the Taliban of sheltering the Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, fighters, while Kabul accuses Pakistan of violating its sovereignty through drone strikes and cross-border shelling. In July, Pakistan reported thousands of Afghan refugees, citing security concerns. Meanwhile, the Taliban's tenuous relationship with Iran has also seen moments of friction. Water right disputes over the Helmand River, and the concerns about the mistreatment of Afghan refugees in Iran remain a sensitive issue. Add to this the growing role of China and Russia, who offer diplomatic recognition and mineral deals, but also seek to limit Afghanistan's drift towards becoming a regional destabilizer. All these layers, internal insurgency, regional rivalry, and the economic breakdown, together they form a very complex web of the security threat.
Approach to national defense and law enforcement.
Afghanistan's current security doctrine is shaped by Taliban's transformation from an insurgent movement to a governing force. Their Ministry of Defense is now headed by, by senior Taliban commanders, often with battlefield experience but little formal training in national defense planning. So the Taliban primarily rely on their religious indoctrinated militias, the so-called Amar bil Maruf forces or the Vice and Virtue squads. To maintain order, these squads enforce the Taliban's interpretation of Islamic law rather than the standardized criminal justice or policing systems. There is no national army in the conventional sense. Instead, we see fighters who are stationed regionally and tasked with dual roles, law enforcement and border control. This creates a fragmented and often abusive internal security structure. The Taliban also has structured the intelligence apparatus, rebranding it as the General Directorate of Intelligence. It is known for its notoriety in the central crackdown on protests, journalists, the ISKP suspects, though credible reports of the Human Rights Watch have noted systemic human rights violence and lack of due process. International cooperation is virtually non existent. With no formal ties to Interpol or regional policing networks, Afghanistan is excluded from transnational counter-terror cooperations. Only informal dialogues, like with China and Russia, mostly focused on preventing ISKP spillovers into Central Asia.
We all know that women have been oppressed under the Taliban rule, where the Taliban had promised otherwise in the beginning of its term. So, how do you think they are fighting back?
Shristi, that's actually a really powerful question because what we are seeing in Afghanistan today is not just a brutal enforcement of gender apartheid, but also a rise of the invisible infrastructure of resistance led by the women. Since the Taliban returned to power in August of 2021, women have been excluded from schools, workplaces, and public life. But instead of disappearing, they've reassembled networks of care, education, and survival quietly but strategically. One major shift has been the emergence of matriarchal households, with tens of thousands of men disappeared or exiled due to the decades of war. Nearly one in four Afghan homes is now led by a woman. These homes are more than just a demographic fact, they're becoming an alternative governance unit. Women in these spaces organize underground schools, informal economies, and mutual aid networks. Rita Manchanda, a famous scholar of post conflict gender agency, calls this transformation of domestic into the political space what she describes as a subterranean agency. Take the Taliban's Maharam rule, for instance. Women can't travel without a male guardian. But in cities like Kandahar and Herat, women are responding by rotating male relatives among the households, effectively sharing them like a communal resource. It's a tactical recognition with patriarchy, not an outright revolt, but it disrupts the totalizing logic of the Taliban control. Underground schools have become epicenters of resistance. The UNICEF estimates that 150,000 girls are being taught in unofficial spaces, basements, mosques, private homes. These classes are often funded by encrypted donations from the diaspora or run through traditional Hawala networks. And what's remarkable is that they just don't teach math or science. They teach civic education, mental health, even feminist history. It's a kind of resistance through knowledge. Meanwhile, in places like Bamiyan, women are sustaining barter economies and clandestine microfinance systems, often using traditional informal money networks. With the most formal women led businesses shut down, these underground enterprises are helping women retain the economic agency and dignity. And it's not isolated. The Afghan women are plugged into the broader digital feminist ecosystem, drawing strength from Iran's Zan Zandegi Azadi movement or from Pakistan's feminist circles. Through VPNs and encrypted forums, they are sharing strategies and political education. So, what this tells us about resistance in authority contexts? It tells us that state power can silence institutions but not agency. Afghan women are not waiting for the world to save them. They're already rebuilding the society in margins through quiet, subversive, everyday acts of resilience.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful session, a very insightful one. And India has been traditionally been a friend of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan's students have been coming to India for education. And I think the women who are suffering there can come to India, explore opportunities here in education, even in jobs if government allows it. And I think both the countries can prosper that way. At least the people can prosper that way. And having good cordial relations with Taliban has benefited India in the past as well. So I think that will remain the status quo. And with that, I think we'll wind up this session.